Okay, what I'm going to do here next is just a demonstration of a watercolor illustration, almost more or less like a textbook type illustration of just a chunk of maple branch that's missing some bark. It's dead. It has a lot of color variations and texture that would be an interesting challenge for us to do in watercolor. Now, what I want to do is just let you know that I'm going to do some real-time demonstration and explanation and then move into some speed drawing and painting just to save some time. But right now what we'll do is run through how I'll set this up. Now I have this drawn out, sketched out in paper with a pencil, and then I digitized it and put it into the PC. So what I'll do is open that up right now, and if I just go to File and then Import Image, what I'll do is go to that folder, and what I could do is bring it up, and then now here it is here, and it'll come up with the transform tool nodes on it, so I could actually rotate it or resize it if I want to. If not, I could just single click and just leave it right where it's at. But the only problem is it still has the paper background, and I could verify that by, if I go to this layer and then just say, for example, choose just this red. And now these are the colors that I normally use with that are identical matches with even my traditional watercolor palette. And they all have the Winsor Newton names that I use with the common colors. Now that will be nice, but we're going to change that around here in a little bit. But what I'll do first is start painting with my red. I'll just go to a mop, and it doesn't matter if it's wet or not, but you could see I'm painting, but you're not going to be able to see anything behind that paper of my original sketch. And if I turn that off, you'll see what I was painting, but you can't see it at all because of the white paper from the imported sketch. Now we could eliminate that issue by going back up to the maple branch drawing and then going up to filter and then just hit white to alpha. And that immediately got rid of all of my white paper, and now I'm just left with a pencil sketch. And so for the sake of this demo, I could even actually then just get rid of the red and just drag it down to the minus sign, and it's gone. So now all I'll have is a pencil drawing ready to go, a sketch of my branch. Now I need my reference material to work from, so what I could do is go up to Window, and then just hit right here, reference image, and that'll open up a window. And if I click on this single, I'll go to that same folder and open up my reference material branch. And now here's my branch ready to paint, and here's my drawing ready to paint on. But now, if I use my traditional colors, that would be okay, but we could take this a little step further. All I have to do is click on this, and then it'll show me, it'll say create color set from image file. Do I want 4, 9, 16, or 25 colors? Let's go with the 25 colors, and then if I open up that same picture, it will actually make me a custom palette that it will just name it the file name, Maple Branch Reference, and then I could just hide that, and now I have a custom palette of colors that will match this branch perfectly. And these are the colors I'll use to start painting as we go. Okay, now that we're ready to begin painting here, I'm just going to do a few more further steps just to move us along. Number one is I'm going to make a few more layers here. I'm just going to change this one to just a drawing. And then we can add a couple more. And what I want to do is actually, looking at this drawing, I see at least 2 different layers and then a third layer for the background. What I would want to do is do the bare wood as far as on one layer and then the bark on another. And you'll see why I would keep those layers separate here shortly. But what we're going to do first is we'll go ahead and make a new layer, and then we'll call this one just bare wood. And then we're going to put this one, we're going to leave the drawing on top. I'm going to put that one down here. Then now we can make a new one. And then we'll just call that one the bark. And then since that one is on top, we'll leave it there. And then, but then we'll also create one just called background. And we're going to move that one down to the bottom. And then we're going to have one more here, and we'll just call it mask. And I'm going to paint that in black and create a mask out of it. But I'll go ahead and run through that. Okay, that's it. And then once I get this painted in all solid black, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it all the way off the paper, even though our illustration ends right here and right here. What I'm going to do is still take the black off the paper. Then that way, when I start to feather these colors into just the paper, then that way if my background comes in close to either side of the feathered in paint, then what I'll be able to do is still protect that white and make sure the white stays the paper. But right now, what I'll do is I'm going to go ahead and start coloring this in black, and we'll just zip through that. Okay, what we're going to do next here is just start putting in our masking layer. And to do that, I have the masking layer selected. And then I'm just going to go over here and grab a nice sharp edge script brush. And what I'll do is I want the water all the way down, the opacity all the way up, and then I'll make it a smaller brush so I could fit into some of these tiny places just to start off with. And then I have the black selected, and that's what I'm going to make it out of. But then what I could do is actually zoom in a little bit just to get us started. And as I said, I'm going to take it off of the right off of the edge of the paper, and I'll just do this as I go. And then what we could even do is, even to color it in, I can even go to a little bit of speed painting, but you'll see what I'm up to here just to give you a rough idea of how long this would take. And I am working with a pen, so it's no comparison to a mouse, that's for sure. But what we could do is just outline this and give us a nice straight edge. And I want to be as close to that pencil line as I can, only because then when I go to do my background, if I need to clean up the edge of the mask at all, I'll be able to. Otherwise, we may have some daylight in between the branch and the background itself. And that's where the two don't meet up exactly if we adjust some things. And we very well may throughout the illustration. Now I'm just going to go down here. I could even include that line there. And then this is the edge of the bark here. And then bring that one down when we're still in place. And then now I'm just going to take this right off the edge of the paper, just in a wavy line kind of way that would still kind of represent a natural branch, not be a perfectly straight line. And then also keep the rough thickness going too. And we'll do it up here. And that's it. I'll stop there and we'll color it in, and then we'll go back to setting it up as a masking layer. Okay, now that I have the black completely shaded in, I could have just used the magic wand and selected that area and then just filled it, but we'll just do it with a brush and save that for another demo. What I want to do now is go over to the masking layer and then make that the mask layer, and all I have to do is hit M, and then that'll make that the mask layer and all the other layers influence layers. Now all that means is that no matter what layer I work on, I will not be able to paint within that black area. It'll mask it out and keep it white, and we will need that later on. But what I also want to do now is go up to the magic wand and then select it and then select that area, and what I can actually do is turn off the mask layer, and it will be completely off, but it will still work even though it's turned off. But what I want to do now, though, is to be able to work within that selected area, and then I'll also work and use the transparency lock tool to actually be able to work only a specific area within this selected area. And you'll see why that'll be important here in a second. But what I want to do right now is I will actually enlarge that and then enlarge this. And I can even bring it out this way a little bit here and enlarge this so I can actually see both of the areas roughly at the same time I'm going to be working on. And as you could see, this bark has like a base color of one of these lighter grays. And what I will do is actually give it a real light coat. I'll just start with, looks like this bluish gray right here. And then I will go down to my bark layer and select it. And then I have to, since I'm going to be, I can't do nothing now, since I'm going to be working within my masking layer, I have to turn that off. And I don't want it to be an influence layer right now, so I can work in it. So what I'll do is then just pick a smaller brush just so I could get in that one tight little area, and then I have my gray selected. Now I'm going to use a good bit of water here because it's on dry paper, but also, and I'm going to turn the opacity way down, and then the water will help it mix together if I lift up my brush and start again. So now what I could do is then just start coloring this in just like this, and we'll do this in real time because all I have to do is be careful around these edges right here, because that's the inner side of the bark, and that's going to be more along the burnt sienna colors. And then once I get close to the edge, I don't have to worry about painting outside the lines, for lack of better words. I always will have the selected area to protect me. And again, if I pick up, now down here, this is the outside edge of the bark here. If I pick up, I could start a new coat, which will be 2 coats in some areas and only 1 coat in others. And that's where you sometimes get the paint overlap. But because I have a lot of water in it, it won't be as bad. And you'll see what I mean. Like right here, see where that is overlapping? That'll diffuse out as soon as I lift up the pen. It's not going to start mixing until I lift up the pen. And now, if I just go back around in here, this is all the silvery gray areas, and that's it. And now, as soon as I lift it up, we'll leave that mix. And that is it. And now let that go. And then now you can see how quickly that vanished and disappeared because it mixed together. And then what I'll do is just let that dry by quick drying. And you could watch up in here, the upper left-hand corner of my paper, every time I hit the quick dry, that's where it'll appear. And then you'll know that I just quick dried it and kept it in place. Now we can see and verify what's all wet. Now that is still all wet. So that's okay. I'll just even clean this up here a little bit and let that dry in and quick dry that. And then now what we could do is I'll turn that off. Now that this is all wet already still, but I'm working in a protected area, and how I could do that is just stay on this layer and then hit the lock transparency. Now what that'll make me do is only be allowed to paint within this area that I just painted. If I even get a bigger size brush, and if I try and paint up in here, not going to do it. But now you can see that as soon as I hit the pre-painted area, what I'll do is I will start laying in some more darker grays, and what it will do is start establishing my cylindrical shape. So if I can make this a little wee bit bigger, and I'm going to pick a little wee bit darker gray. We'll go with this one right here. And then what I could do is, now that since this area right here, this little piece of bark folded over, since I didn't paint that yet, I won't have to worry about painting that now. And if I do that, then now that it's wet, I will just let that bleed in and then come down here and do this and let that bleed in. And then down at the bottom, I'll do this and then let these bleed in. And I can even hurry it along a little bit. I'll quick dry that. And then the way my pen is set up, if I hit the back click, the alt click, I have it set up so it immediately becomes my blender brush. And then what I could do is just soften it up a little bit just to help it out. And then what I will also do is go back in and grab that same gray, but this time I'm going to make it a good bit darker and do the same thing. And then now I'll let that bleed out a little bit. We could help it along. And I'm even using a hard edge brush to do this, but it's still carrying the paint pretty good. And then now quick dry that. And then one last one, and you'll see if I use that same color, but then if I go to a softer brush like this mop, I will turn its size way down, and then it will actually be a lot different as far as how well it blends. And then I will actually give it one more coat at the very bottom, and then just help that along, and that's it. And then I'll quick dry that, because you could see how this bottom area down here is a good bit darker, and then it has that speckled color pattern. It's a very strong texture throughout the all bark area, with the exception of this area right in here is still a light silvery. And then we also have, and I can even zoom in on it too just for that, we have certain lichens that are part of the growing on the part of the bark itself, and for that reason I added this cobalt turquoise, and then also a burnt sienna for the bearwood. Those I added just as far as to give me a couple of extra colors to work with, even on top of the colors it picked. Because remember, we're doing this for ourselves, and we can do it how we see fit. And I definitely see some strong burnt siennas in there that I would like to work with, but that would be my base color, and then I would make it a little bit more brown on top of that. But now, since we have this area protected, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do one more of the same gray, and I'm going to go a little wee bit darker this time, and then I'm going to just give it one more coat at the very outside edge, just to keep that cylindrical shape alive. And that would be it. I'll go around here, and then you can see that's feathering in nice. I don't even have to help it too much. And I'm going to darken this up down in here, and then that's it. And I quick dried all of that. But now what I'm going to do next, because this is a protected area because of my transparency lock, then what I could do is go back in here and grab my heavy splatter brush, and I will turn it down a little bit. It doesn't have to be that big. But then if I grab that greenish gray, especially both of these colors, I can even make it. What I'll do is I'll start with the brown and just give it a light coat, but I want to turn my water way down just so it bleeds and blends a little bit. It'll soften the edge so it kind of feathers it into what's there, but then I don't want it to make it look like it's a layer of color floating above everything else with real hard edges. So what I'll do is then turn up the opacity, and then what I could do is then just go ahead and just start, and you'll see, and I'll quick dry that right away, and quick dry that right away. And then now we're already starting to have a hard, strong texture. And then I'll even go ahead and grab that greenish color now. And then I'll go back and do the same thing and stop that. And go back in here and stop this. This looks like this is all pretty well covered with this type of pattern, a real strong speckled pattern, and then stop that. But what we could do though is even some of these areas we could even go back in. What's nice about digital is we could go back in with an eraser and pull some of these whiter, much smaller areas out instead of trying to paint around them. It'd be much easier to remove the color than versus trying to paint around them. And then as intricate as they are, it'd be pretty impractical to actually try and mask them out or even block them out in any way. Now that I have this started, I'm going to maybe give it one more coat right in here and then block that. And then right in here too, it's pretty dark. We'll give it another coat right there. And then that'll give me something to even pick up a little bit of color later if I have to erase it. And then that way we'll be ready to go. Now, for example, this right here where I accidentally painted over the area, that's exactly what I'm talking about. And what I could do is actually just go back in with the eraser and take a nice straight hard edge, and we'll take it way down. And then I can actually even just go back in and lift that area right out, and we would be ready to go. And then that way now I could start these. This is going to be a real deep brown. That's this color right here. And then along here is going to be all deep brown. And then this is going to be a deep brown, which is this right here. And I have it just roughly penciled in because I will actually draw, so to speak, as I paint, as I don't have to have a real detailed drawing for this particular case. I can actually change things as I go. And then what I'll do is start working on this up here too. But right now, this will give you a rough idea why I needed to make this area a lock transparency area within my selected area so I could use my splatter tool. But then the splatter tool is very, how would you say, confined as to where it's going to go, which is pretty much exactly where I want it to go. And then now I would actually start working on the bare wood layer if I started work on these areas themselves. And then if I even need to make another layer for whatever reason, I could also do that as we go. But right now I'll just start working and we'll move on to the speed drawing and painting, and then I'll come back and explain a few things after that. Okay, this is the beginning of the speed painting. There's only about a total of 2 minutes that will bring us to the finished piece. And all I'm doing is refining the shapes more and more. I may start out with some of the larger shapes and draw them in first. I usually just draw as I paint because a drawing will tell me nothing about what colors I want to use or how I'll mix them. And then keep in mind, even with transparency watercolors, depending on your pattern of how you lay your colors down, is quite different. If you start working with more than one color, they will have a different effect. In other words, obviously putting black over yellow is not the same as putting yellow over black, which is an extreme example, but it is the case with watercolors. Now, for the shapes and the different details that I'm working, I'm just trying to refine each shape and color more and more. And what I'm trying to do is actually use the colors that I chose, because I added the burnt sienna and the cobalt turquoise to add to my palette, just because I want to put the burnt sienna down first and then build up the browns over that. That is a big difference because that's my artist choice going by traditional watercolors. I will soon be adding another layer here, just a yellow layer, and what I wanted to do there is just add the yellows to the bark, and this gives me the option of how much yellow I want to add, but not necessarily commit it to the painting. You'd have to hit a bunch of undo steps if that was the case, whereas I could bring it up in layers at a little bit at a time, and then finally commit and merge layers if I want. Okay, now that we have enough of the illustration done, what we have to do is adjust our mask to fit the new perimeter of the branch itself. Now, I didn't copy it exactly, but I did the best I could as far as just taking out the important characteristics of the bark and the bare wood just to make it look like a maple branch. Now, what we need to do, though, is to adjust our outer perimeter. Since I made some changes as I went, then what I can do is actually go back to my masking layer, turn it back on, and it'll be black. But then now we could already see some pieces here sticking out that I'll have to add black to them. But then what I can also do is just run the opacity back and forth, and then I will also see what needs cut out. There's a little wee bit right here changing. This is definitely changing. And then there's a few pieces down in here that will have to be erased out just to adjust the outer perimeter. Because the reason why is I do really want my mask to match as perfect as I can to my branch, just so none of these colors, the lighter colors of the branch, especially the silvery area, these are fairly light colors, so they're not contaminated by any of the colors from the background, but then also so I don't have no daylight in between the branch and the background. That would just stay pure white there then if I would try to paint around it now, but I have to get rid of that part of the mask. So what we'll do is I will do that and clean this up, and I will be right back with the new perimeter. Okay, our mask is done. We adjusted the perimeter to the changes we made while we were painting. And then now the only thing I did want to show you just real quickly was the gold layer I added while I was speed painting. What I wanted to do was add a yellow ochre that brings it closer to what I have here. But I wanted to be able to do it in a very controlled way, not to overdo it, underdo it. So I didn't also commit it to the bark layer. Then I would have a hard time readjusting. So if I made that on my own layer, if I turned that off, then you could see what I had before, and it was pretty cool compared to the colors over here. And this way, I put it on its own layer. Now that I'm pretty well happy with where I put it and how it turned out, I could start merging these layers, but I'll just leave them go for now. Our illustration is pretty well done for the branch itself, so I could close out my reference window just to give me some more room. And then what I wanted to do was just real quick explain that I added a couple of layers here. We'll give it a couple of variations for the background on each layer and just see how they work. But also, if you ever need to know where your masking layer is, just for the sake of detail work or fine script work, and you need to know where you're painting compared to where the mask is, I turn it on. Instead of that big black gob, you can actually turn down the opacity, and then you'll still be able to see where it's at up against the white paper, but then you'll also be able to paint according to where your mask is if you need to. Now, for me, in this particular case, I don't even need to know where it's at because I'm just trying to protect the branch area, and that's all I'm concerned about. So I can even turn off the layer completely, but it will still work and still block out the branch area or any influenced layer that I have. And that is the big advantage of the masking area versus a marquee tool, that I could choose what layers I want to be influenced by the mask or leave it uninfluenced. In other words, say for example, if I was painting a barn and I wanted some of the background colors, whether they be burnt siennas or light yellow ochres, to be mixed in with the barn wood, then I would turn off that particular layer and let that color splash into my barn area if I was trying to protect the barn. This way, you can control what layers you want to be influenced and not influenced, and that's a very big advantage over Marquee Tool. Now, what I did was I added some additional layers, wet drips, drips with no mask, then dry on dry and simple wash, and this will be just a couple of variations of our background that we'll try and see how it works. Now, I don't know if I would want too much texture in the background. It has to be a fairly simple background. We'll try drips, but the drips might start taking away from the illustration itself. If you have too much going on in the background or too much texture, it may start to compete with the illustration itself. And I obviously want the illustration to be the center of attention and not the background. So with that in mind, what I will do is go up, and with the wet drips, I will go to the tilt, turn that on, and then my layer is already wet. I could verify that. And then again, you could see how the mask is already working, that it's protecting my masked area and keeping that area dry. So if I turn that off so the light blue doesn't bother us, I will go over here and grab a color. And I went back to my traditional palette, only because it has a lot more blues in it, and I wanted a cooler background versus all warm colors. Then that way I'll have the contrast of a warm object up against a cool background, and that will help set it off in another way also. Now if I just go ahead and take some of these cool colors, I'll just start with the cobalt blue here, and then just put some down, and then let that go, and then we will go into the cobalt violet, and it's a little wee bit warmer than the blues, but it's still fairly cool. And I have the opacity way down because I'm just going to do this a little wee bit at a time, and then you could see now how these colors compare to our mask. But then you could also see up in here and down in here how the mask is protecting the branch area. So if I wanted that paint to be feathered off into nothing, that will still be there. Now you can see it's already starting to blend, it's already starting to bleed, but unfortunately what we're getting here, I'll go to a little wee bit of burnt sienna, and just to tie it up and give a little bit of color unity, we're starting to get some runs here, and let me see if I can get, I made a nice sharp edge there. Now if we don't want that, we could destroy it later or even erase it. But now what's happening is I'm starting to get some runs here, and watch what happens to this run. It's going to start going around that branch, and I may not want that because it's going to outline the branch. And then also down here at the bottom, the mask itself is preventing the paint from going down below that branch. So in here, it's puddling it up against the mask, and then down here it's draining away from it, and it's creating a white shape that I may not want. It's almost like a pillow effect where you go around the object, and it's creating a situation that I may not want. Now what I'll do is I will actually quick dry that and lock that in place. But now that would be one system. But if I want to eliminate that problem, I could go on to my next layer, and we'll turn that one off, and then we'll go to this one. Now the drips with no mask, just real quickly, what I would do is actually turn off my masking layer and not make it a masking layer anymore. And then that way, if I go back in and start painting again, I will be painting right into my branch, and it will affect the colors, even though it's a layer below all of the branch layers. Because I'm working transparent, it's still going to make a difference. As to now, you could see that there's no more protection up here as far as what the mask was doing before. But now what I'm doing now is just working these in place, and then what I will do is add some little bit of violet and let that go and run together. And I could go back to the burnt sienna again and just add a little bit here and there, and then we'll see what that does. But as you can see now, it's not puddling up anymore down here, and it's also not pulling away from the branch. And if we get a run, it's not going to stop. It's just going to keep on going. I'll just put some French ultramarine, and I can make this a little wee bit darker. But again, I can't go too dark because then you'll start losing the edges. But now you could see how muted the colors are now because I've been putting layers of blue behind those layers. But what it's doing is it's actually affecting my branch. Now, I don't have any more white and I don't have any more issues with colors going around it, because if I turn these two layers off, you'll see that the colors are non-stop. But now how can I go back and redo my actual branch and get rid of that contaminated color? All I have to do is, what I will do is I will quick dry it a couple times and make sure everything is dry, and dry the layer. And then what I would do is go back up to the masking layer, turn it back on, and then make it a masking layer again. But what I will do is turn up the opacity and then go back to my magic wand and select that layer, and then go back down to the layer I was working on, which is the drips with no mask. And then what I could do is I'll turn this off so we could see what happens, and grab my eraser, and I have a hard-edged eraser, and start, first I have to take it off the influenced layer so I can work in that area of the mask. Now I'll be able to erase, and you could see how it's cleaning up the shape of my branch, and it's going back to the original colors that I made it. And that way I have to have the influence layer over here turned off so I can work within that area, because it won't even let me erase if I don't. But now that I have that, I could go back up to the magic wand and deselect that, and now this is what we would have as far as a background. But it's something that I took advantage of, the black masking area, and just selected that area, and then went back and erased the wash that was behind the transparent colors of the branch. And this way, that is one way of the drips not affecting the way they go or the way the colors blend. Then that way I can actually have an unobstructed background. Okay, now that we pretty much dried the paper and everything's set where it's at, you can see how the texture is starting to compete with the branch itself. And in this particular case, I don't know if I'd want that. Even the hard edges, I would have to tone them down a little bit. I just wouldn't want a simple background competing with our illustration. But that's my preference. But now if I turn that off, and then I'll go back to the dry on dry, and we'll give that one a shot. I will turn off the drips, and then what I could do is stay with the same colors just to keep everything the same. But what I'll do is just a little wee bit at a time. But what I would do is grab this flat dry, and then our paper should be dry, which it is. And what I can do is the opacity is way down. And what I will do is just give some very subtle watercolor brush strokes here, and then just let them go. Now keep in mind, since this is dry on dry, nothing's going to happen. But what I will do is, how I'm getting nice subtle edges, if they become too strong, then what I would do is just go to the blender and start destroying them a little bit, and then just let some of them there, though, just very subtle, if they don't overpower the branch itself. But then it could be more of a little bit of a traditional watercolor look. Now keep in mind, I could adjust the visual settings and let the water carry the paint to the outer perimeters of the brush strokes. But then what that would do is create what's called blooms, and those edges might again overpower my illustration of the branch. So I don't know if I would want that either. And so I would rather keep the background somewhat simple in this particular case, and that way I could then just leave it just like that, and I'm drawing away here, blending, just trying to diffuse certain areas. And then if I want, I can even go back in and maybe put a little wee bit of the burnt sienna in here and there. But what I could do is just put it right here, right there, maybe right here, right there, right here, and then go back in and then destroy those edges just a little bit. And I'll even leave this edge here just a little wee bit. Could leave that edge there. And then destroy these just a little bit. And now this could be considered one variation of a basic background. And if I want to expose more of my white area, now what I did was, since the mask is on, I didn't have to be concerned about it. But what I also did with the background, I also stopped my colors right even with where the painting stops of the illustration. And I think that's a little bit better, only because then it looks a little bit more intentional. And that way, what I'm doing is creating the effect of my background feathering off into white paper at the same place the branch is feathering off into white paper. And with a simple background like this, I think I could even leave that one right there. And that's it. That I would leave just the way it is. But then now to do a little wee bit more of a watercolor wash, classic wash, I could go to the simple wash. I'll turn that one off. And then now what I could do is this layer I will wet. I could verify that it is wet. But then what I'm going to do is turn off the diffusion for this one. And that way everything will be soft. And what I'm going to try to do is get an airbrush effect. And what I'll do is go back to the round mop. And I am going to put these layers down all one time. And then lift up. So I get a nice even coat. Now if I have a lot of water in it, it'll diffuse together to a certain point. But we're going to try and get this like an airbrush effect as much as we can. And then I'll go with the burnt sienna again. And just go a little wee bit down here and then a little wee bit up there. And then I'll turn on the diffusion and let it soften up the edges to the point where I won't even be able to see my original brush strokes. And this will give me the brush effect or look that I am looking for. And what it can do is carry the paint off in all directions. Now if I help it out with the blender, then what I will have to do is, what it'll do is it'll smudge the paper a little bit, and it will destroy that paper texture. So I want to leave it blend again for a little while. But because I'm doing it the way I'm doing, real light subtle colors, and then flat with no drips over here turned on, then I know it's going to evenly run in all directions, and I won't get any washed out effects of where the paint was being carried off down below these two branches here. And then that way now I'm just getting a real light airbrush look, and I would actually possibly leave that one right where it's at. Also, you could see the subtle lines here where the mask did, but then I know that if I turn these two layers off, then it did protect my branch area, and that's what I would want. If I turn these back on, and then I'll be back to the full illustration, and I could even quick dry that a couple of times just to make sure everything's set in place. And then that I would use, it would be this one, or I could turn that one off, or it could be this one. They both are very close, but they have some subtle differences. But either one, in my opinion, doesn't overpower the branch itself. If I turn this one off and then go back to this one, then I think this one is starting to compete with the branch, because you're starting to get some really strong streaks in the background because of how wet I had everything, and then a slight edges that I would have to destroy, because that contrast could be an eye grabber if it's too strong. And that way I would have to work on the background to the point where I would not want it competing with the illustration itself. this one I will turn off, and I think I would actually go with that one myself, because it's very simple and basic, but it is a background instead of just white paper. And I do like the cools there with the warm colors up against it, and that is the reason why I went back to my traditional watercolor palette, because I have a lot more blues in it that I'm familiar with. I centered up the finished piece, and here we are. This is at 35%. We'll just take a quick scan over the finished piece. And it looks like a completed piece of work. So we will just recenter back up. And I hope you enjoyed this demo, and hope you found something that will help you painting your favorite subjects in your style. Thanks for watching.